Welcome to the Happy, Highly Sensitive Life podcast, where we talk about building a life that lights you up as a highly sensitive person. In this show, you'll feel like you're sitting down with a friend who's here to help you unlock your energy, find the work you're designed to do, express your true self, and follow your heart. It's time to shift the conversation about sensitivity. In this space, your feelings are always valid. A joyful life and work you love are meant for you, and the possibilities are endless. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Happy, Highly Sensitive Life podcast. I'm your host, Maria Chobe. I'm an INFP and a highly sensitive person, a former therapist, former social worker, and a former coach. That's a lot of formers, but today I am just coming here to you as me. I am opening up and sharing my uncensored, intimate thoughts on living as a highly sensitive person. And in this episode, I'm sharing why I'm starting this podcast. I'll tell you a little bit about my own experience with being a highly sensitive person, and also a little bit about where this podcast is heading. So first, you may be wondering, why am I doing a podcast? Well, we get a lot of messages as HSPs about how to be, right? From family, friends, coaches, teachers. And those messages that we get become the voices in our own heads that tell us we need to brush it off, let it go, be a little less of ourselves. And these voices lead us to disconnect from our true selves. And so I want to be a different, loving voice in your head that says, follow your heart. Your emotions and your feelings are wise, and anything is possible. Being an HSP, you can also feel like you're the only one and feel misunderstood. And I want you to know, you're not alone. You are worthy of love and acceptance exactly as you are. It's time to shift the conversation about sensitivity and to be released, to feel free to be ourselves. And so today, I want to start our conversation by telling you my story with the hopes that hearing my story will help you make sense of your story. After that, I'll share more about where this podcast is heading and how it can enrich your life. Okay, so let's go. We are going to start by going all the way back to give you some context. All the way back to my childhood. I am the youngest of three girls, spaced about 2 years apart. My parents were not big on change, and that was a good thing for me. We lived in the same house throughout my childhood. I went to the same small school from preschool through 8th grade, and when I went to high school, about half those kids that I knew went with me to my high school. So I didn't have a lot of change. And as a kid, I was loving and sweet and helpful and very observant. As a little girl, I was definitely an observer. I was the kid who hid behind her mom's legs, wide-eyed and hesitant, staring out at the world. I was a silent, very quiet little girl. In kindergarten, I didn't talk, and my teacher asked my mom in December when she came to the classroom if I knew how to talk, because I hadn't said a word to her all year. I was also afraid of fire drills. It was 2nd or 3rd grade, I think, where I learned we were going to have a fire drill earlier in the day, and I had to go to the bathroom, but I didn't want to get stuck in the bathroom when the fire drill went off. And so I tried to hold it, and the fire drill wasn't until much later in the day, and I ended up pooping my pants. After that fire drill was over, I hightailed it to the bathroom to clean myself up. Oh my goodness, it was such a mess. I was wearing tights that day, so I was able to just toss out the underwear, clean myself up as best as I could. But man, that was how much I did not like fire drills. And I did not want to be stuck in the bathroom alone with a fire drill. So I also had sensitivities to clothing. Probably in about 3rd or 4th grade, I had a pair of pink polyester pants that my mom had made that I loved. And I had a shirt that had like a picture of a bouquet of balloons on the front of it. And I wore that every day because it was so comfortable. I actually had a friend who asked my mom one day, my mom was at school volunteering for field day, and she asked my mom if I had any other clothing because this is all that I wore. So my mom bought some fabric, made me some new pants and a new top, and I refused to wear it. I refused to wear them because they were too scratchy. Dinner time was a time where a lot of family drama played out in my house. My dad would tell me to eat my very dry hamburger in a stern tone of voice, and I would start choking back tears. And my sister always sat to my left, and I knew that she was going to look at me and look down her nose at me and notice that I was getting tearful. And I wanted to sink under the table when this happened. But my mom's hamburgers, sorry, Mom, love you, but your hamburgers are so dry and hard. They were so hard to eat. So dinner was always one of those places where everybody was looking to see if Mario would cry. But really and truly, my sisters, when I was growing up, were my world. Just such love for my sisters. They were my constant companions and my playmates and my protectors. And also, we tormented each other, playfully and for real. We fought. And scratching was our thing. Oh, scratching is so painful. I remember there was one time when my sister took my pink headband, my favorite pink headband, and I went to retrieve it. My friend Chrissy was there. She followed me down to my sister's bathroom in the basement, and a skirmish broke out. There was scratching and hitting and stomping and hair pulling, and we fought. And then we also had a fight like this. You won't believe this. We had a fight like this in the hallway of high school. We had lockers right next to each other, and we were having a bad morning. And luckily, there was no one in the hallway except for, of course, my dear friend Chrissy. And there was stomping and hair pulling and scratching. It was mortifying. Luckily, as I said, the hallway was relatively empty. But we fought. And my friend Chrissy, she is still my friend to this day. That is unconditional love, I tell you. She witnessed some fights. Let me tell you about my relationship with my parents. My dad was a huge introvert and an extroverted job. He was a dentist. Now, he definitely had low-level depression throughout his life. And he was basically in self-preservation mode throughout my childhood. He was just preparing to go to work, recovering from work. He was always doing some kind of self-care. He was my first exposure to meditation because he would meditate before work and he'd meditate after work. He was working out. He would run out his stress. He would lift weights. He would do Tai Chi. He did all the things to try to deal with this job that just was so taxing on him. He was pretty emotionally withdrawn. And when he was mad, he would just internalize it. But there would be this air of tension in the house. And I think we all would walk on eggshells around him when he was in this place. In hindsight, that was probably a better fit for me than if he yelled and screamed. That probably was better for me. I don't know. There was a period of time where I really questioned how he dealt with his emotions. But over time, I've had a little bit more perspective on that. So my dad was pretty emotionally withdrawn. He told me he loved me for the first time in a letter that he sent me after I went off to college. Now, my mom was his opposite. She was very loving and still is very loving. She was overly protective. She covered my eyes when we were watching the movie E.T. in the movie theater. E.T. was dying, and she thought that would be upsetting for me, so she covered my eyes. And I think her protectiveness, as much as I hated it at the time, it was a good thing, I think. So in an effort to understand my dad's emotional distance, she became certified to administer the Myers-Briggs type indicator. She gave all of us the test at some point. I was probably in 8th or 9th grade when she tested me, and I was an INFP, and she very much wanted to let us each be our own people. And she really wanted us to find work we loved because my dad was so miserable. So that understanding that she gave me was everything. If you know anything about the Myers-Briggs, she is my exact opposite personality type. She is an ESTJ, and I found her so mortifying out in public. She talked loudly to everyone who crossed her path and drew attention everywhere she went. I mean, I died over and over in her presence out in public. My mom and I were what you would technically call emotionally enmeshed. I was her listening ear and her little therapist, probably starting in about my teen years. And when I went to grad school to study social work and learned about healthy family dynamics, I analyzed the heck out of my family with a very critical eye. And I started identifying myself with the role of the peacekeeper. That's what I'd been. I was the peacekeeper in our family. And, I was silently observant initially because of my cautious nature. But after watching my dad use silence as his self-protection, it became a form of self-defense for me too. It kind of became my default in relationships, being silent and avoiding conflict. Now, looking back, I'm grateful for the childhood I had. I had the parenting, I think, that was mostly right for me. And I also realized that I have 25 years of perspective on this. I've been out of the family soup, so that means I have a lot of years of perspective on this. I haven't always felt this gracious, which you'll hear about in a minute. But now I see that my parents did the best they could with the emotional resources and the self-awareness that they had at the time. And now, 25 years later, here's what I know. I am meant to own my voice and my story. And that's why I'm here speaking on this podcast. I am here and I am meant to share my story if it can help you. So let's keep going with this because life gets pretty confusing for me as I leave home. Going off to college, a lot of kids from my high school went to my university, which was a good thing. My friend Chrissy was in the hall across from my hall, and a lot of girlfriends came to my university from high school. So I had a lot of friendly, familiar faces. It was a no-brainer. I was going to study psychology in college. I was super interested in personal growth. I'd been reading self-help books forever. So that's what I was going to study. And what surprised me is how much I struggled in my psychology classes. I met with an advisor. She said, well, here's your alternative. You could study human services, which was a degree at my college, my university. And so I did. I wanted something easier that I could be successful in, so I made the switch. And it turns out that this was a degree that I loved. My favorite class was Gender Roles and Family Relationships with Dr. Catherine Allen, and I loved it. My plan was to get a graduate degree in social work to become a licensed clinical social worker. So that's what I was on track to do. And now there was this other side of me, which was the partying side. I was the overprotected kid who partied too much my freshman year. I drank Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday. I did a lot of partying. I did not do any drugs. I was afraid of drugs. I didn't do any mushrooms. I was afraid of pot. I didn't do any of that stuff. I had 2 long-term boyfriends in college. I was very cautious about physical intimacy. I was extremely thoughtful about it and gave myself the time and space to be intentional about how I wanted to approach sex, knowing that it would be a big emotional deal for me and that I needed a trustworthy partner. I took my time and waited until college for the right partner. So why am I telling you this? Well, to show you that it's okay to take your time with anything, to set your own pace, to write your own script for how things progress so that you feel comfortable. Now, there were other ways I was not successful with keeping to my own path, and one of them was with getting a tattoo. So my girlfriends were driving about an hour away to get tattoos. They were like, come on, you should come with us. You should come with us. And I was like, I don't want to get a tattoo. But I went along. And the whole time everybody was saying, Maria, you should get one. You should get one. The first night I resisted. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then for some reason, the second night, they went back a second night. For some reason, I got one. I succumbed to the pressure. That's totally what it was. And I will tell you, the tattoo that I got is smaller than my thumbnail. I think what I said was, okay, well, if I'm going to get one, I'm going to get a really small one. And I'm not going to tell you where it is, where it's located. I actually took a sociology class in college, and the instructor who had a lot of tattoos was doing his dissertation on tattooing. And he said that the number one thing people regret about getting a tattoo is where they get the tattoo. It's not what they get. And I got to tell you, that is true for me. I regret where I got my tattoo, which is why I'm not telling you where I got my tattoo. But I did. I got this tattoo. And man, I wish I didn't. So I made it out of college and went on to grad school. My plan was to get a master's of social work, get a clinical license, and become a therapist. I always had this dream of having a therapy practice out of my home. So in grad school, I was not prepared for how emotionally rigorous and challenging grad school would be for me. I had an internship in a state mental health facility for youth. I was learning all kinds of theories about healthy and unhealthy family functioning. And I spent a lot of time deeply analyzing my family dynamics and rejecting and being critical of how I was raised. And that's when I learned the term emotional enmeshment. My dad was emotionally unavailable and had what I decided he probably had: untreated, constant, low-level depression known as dysthymia. I was diagnosing everyone and trying to diagnose myself with things. And my saving grace was that I had an extroverted classmate who would schedule girls' night out. That gave me a bit of lightness with it all. But overall, it was exhausting and emotionally taxing. And then I graduated and I got a job. And as a highly sensitive person, you know how it is. This question of work is such a hard one. You long for meaningful work that makes a difference. And yet my experience was that meaningful work wiped me out. And when I started working as a therapist, I was worn out and I was changed by it. I look back on that time and I can see now that my vital life force energy was being drained. I spent 99% of my free time watching bad reality TV and eating all the candy. And my energy was just zapped by helping people heal. I love all the theories about how to work with your mind and emotions. I am a great advice giver. I'm a great listener, but I am not meant to be a lighthouse for that recovery. Kind of like I am not meant to be any kind of a professional who deals with blood. Every time Adam, my husband, cuts himself, which seems to happen a lot, no matter the size of the cut, I dance around, wring my hands, and declare urgently that we need to go to the emergency room immediately. No matter what, I am doing this. So here I was trying to help people in emergencies, and I just was watching myself be changed by it in a way that I didn't like. My energy to be curious and to try new things is non-existent. I was bored because 99% of my free time was spent in front of the TV so that I could rebuild energy to go back to work on Monday. So I was either always recovering for work or getting ready to go back to work. And one of the things I know is that throughout my life, I've been very easily influenced by my environment. I've watched myself expand and contract and get louder and quieter and get bigger and shrink down in relation to the people I surround myself with, to the job I have, and to how spiritually centered and rooted in the truth of myself I am. So when I dated, I would lose myself in my partner. My mom would say to me, the most important relationship you have is the one you have with yourself. You need to work on that one. I had so much confusion around dating. I had so much confusion around work, so fatigued by work. And in the midst of all of this, my dad had just retired, and he moved to the town where my sister and I were living and still live. Now, my parents were newly separated. My mom was down in North Carolina, settling her parents' estate. My dad came here, moved to our town, got himself a little apartment. And one day he was working out and lifting weights and healthy, and the next day he lost all function on one side of his body and was in a wheelchair. So at this time, my mom came to our town to be by my dad's side and to help in any way that she could. So with this turn in his health, this was the most challenging thing that I've ever been through in my life. And it's hard. It was oddly beautiful and meaningful. It was an incredible time of healing for my dad and I. We started saying, "I love you," out loud with words to each other all the time. And my parents showed me how it was possible to lovingly separate. They continued to be separated, but she continued to be by his side. So here I am. This is me. I'm working as a therapist at the age of 25 or 26. And I remember talking to an older, wiser therapist friend of mine about how working was harder than I ever imagined. I confessed to him that I was having this fantasy, and the fantasy was about getting married and staying home with kids to avoid going to work. Now I know that staying home with the kids isn't necessarily easier. I was reading a book at the time called The Cinderella Complex, A Woman's Hidden Fear of Independence. It's a book about women's unconscious desire to be taken care of. And I was like, darn straight, that's got to be easier than this. Okay, so I say that, oh my gosh, Dr. Catherine Allen of my gender roles class just would have, she would have given me a stern talking to. But the truth of the matter is I was questioning everything. Did I want kids, or did I just think I wanted kids because I was socialized to want them? Did I want to get married, or did I just think I wanted to get married because I was socialized to think I wanted to get married? So around that time, I started therapy, as much to explore this as to process my dad's health issues and my parents' shifting relationship. And I eventually did become clear and reconnect to this realization that I had always had a desire to get married and have a really healthy partnership and marriage. The kid thing was still up in the air to me, but I wanted a strong marriage with an emotionally available partner. And around this time, I met a guy and we became serious. I thought he might be the one. A day after Christmas, we were driving to New Orleans for a conference for him, and we got the call that we needed to turn around. My dad was taking a turn for the worse. I didn't make it to his bedside before he died. And I actually think that was a good thing. It was actually my mom who pointed this out to me. She said, "Maria, I don't think you were meant to see that. It wasn't an easy passing." And I'm so grateful to her for saying that to me, because I never once felt a sense of guilt about that. I just knew in my gut she was right. I didn't need those images and those pictures in my head. So with my dad's death, I was emotionally drained by my grief. I had very little energy left to give to being a therapist. I took a few weeks off of work. I ramped up my therapy. I started taking Zoloft for depression, and which I ended up taking for, I think, about a year and a half. And I realized a lot of things at this point. First, I needed work to just be easier and not feel so hard. Up to this point, I wanted to look for another job, but I hadn't really let myself consider it because I worried about what people would think, that they'd think I couldn't cut it and that I was a failure. But my dear dad's passing showed me something else. You cannot push off your happiness. I didn't want to sit in a room at work waiting for the clock to move and waiting for the precious moments of life to move faster. If you spend the majority of your life and time at work, that energy exchange needs to be the right energy exchange. So that was the beginning of a journey to become really intentional about what I decided to devote my energy to. I could see that there were trade-offs. If I gave 100% of my energy to work, I had little left to give to my personal life. And while work was an important part of who I was, despite those earlier fantasies about just quitting it all, work was important to me, but I didn't want it to be my everything. And after my dad's death, I looked for a new job. I became a program manager at a local nonprofit that worked with kids and families, and I spent about 5 years supervising a small team. It was an improvement, but it wasn't my life's calling by any stretch of the imagination, and so I kept looking. And that's when I learned about professional coaching. And I was instantly drawn to it because therapy and life coaching are very different energetically. Coaching asks the kinds of questions like, who are you? What do you really want for your life? And what do you want to feel fulfilled? And how do you get there? And so this was the beginning of a series of coach trainings that I did. I studied foundational coaching methods for therapists, and I took relationship coach training and dating coach trainings. And I enrolled in the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and became a holistic health coach. And I have to say that learning to eat for stable energy was so eye-opening for me. I didn't realize how much my blood sugar fluctuating throughout the day tanked my energy. You know, as a highly sensitive person, when you're doing deep listening, as it is, that wears you out. And then to add rolling blood sugar on top of that, just to figure out how to eat in a way that I didn't have to constantly fight the blood sugar crashes, in addition just trying to navigate the fatigue of being a deep listener. It was just everything. So with this training, I had a new dream planted. I started my first blog. Now, mind you, this is the first blog of probably about 6 blogs that I've started in my life. And I ended up getting a little dating column in a local newspaper. I just love to write. And even more, I knew that I wanted to work for myself at some point. But I needed a way to pay the bills. Isn't that always the thing that keeps us from finding the right balance with work? I want meaningful work, but I want just the right amount of meaningful work, like maybe part-time work, but we have to pay the bills, right? That makes it harder to make some of these decisions. So I needed a way to pay the bills. So I got a paid job as an academic coach at my alma mater, and I started seeing 6 students a day, 4 days a week, and it was intense. It also taught me so much about how to manage my energy and having very small increments of free time. I was meditating for like 5 minutes between my sessions to get through the day. It was a lot. And then eventually I ended up moving back to my town, and I got a job as a career coach. And now for about the last 5 years, I've been a program coordinator at a local university here. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I just want to say, if you're unhappy, look for something that's a better fit. You can shift your life to work for you and be intentional about how and where you put your energy, with your emotions as your guide. You are meant to do work you love. Are you happy and satisfied? Are you frustrated or feeling unsuccessful and burnt out? Those feelings are loving guides, and they are here to spark you to shift your life to fit you. So tune into how you're feeling and then give yourself permission to honor that feeling. Now, when you admit how you feel and that you want to do something different, your mind may spring in and start judging you, saying things like, you're weak and that's why you're leaving. You're being a quitter. Or what will people think if you quit? People will think you can't cut it. Now, this is your brain's natural negativity bias that wants to stop you from making changes because change is scary and puts you in the middle of the unknown. But when you notice that that's happening, and when I noticed that was happening, I adopted the mantra, anything is possible. Anything is possible. And this was just my way of reminding myself to think outside the box if I was really feeling stuck and like there was no other way. This was my way of reminding myself to widen my perspective. Once you acknowledge what you're feeling and what you really want, you'll start noticing the options that are available to you. Okay, so let me continue with my story. My dad died, my boyfriend and I moved in together, and then we lived together for a few years, and then he was not the one, and we split up. And around this time, my sister had twin boys, and I saw the realities of parenting up close and personal. And while I adored my nephews, parenting seemed super tough. And I was even less convinced that I wanted to do that. I kept dating, and I started dating with my head rather than my heart. I had a list of things I was looking for. How often do we do this? We make a list. It was emotionally easier, and when I dated people I was super attracted to, I became too rattled for my liking when I felt that physical chemistry, and I never wanted to be the kind of person who got swept up in love in feelings and made a rash, foolish decision as a result. So I shoved down and distracted myself from my emotions, so much so that I ended up marrying a super kind man who was not my right person. I made the decision to get married based on logic, and I bypassed that little feeling that said our relationship wasn't right. My ex is a good person, but I intuitively knew our partnership wasn't meant to last. And when I finally gave myself permission to acknowledge the messages coming from my emotions and end my marriage at the age of 38, it was like a homecoming. I finally came home and reconnected with myself. And I left without any preconceived notions about wanting to remarry or what my future would look like. My only goal was to listen to my heart. And a few years later, I met Adam. My heart did want to have another relationship, another partnership, and I started online dating, and I met him. Actually, we were born in the same hospital. We grew up about 30 minutes from each other. We went to the same college and never met. He moved to my town, and that's when we finally met. He had been married previously but didn't have any children, and his marriage ended around the same time that my marriage ended, and then he moved to my town, and we met, and he was my right person, and I could feel it deep down. He was emotionally available, and we had an easy compatibility and chemistry. And so here's what I learned from marrying the wrong person based on having a pros and cons list, and then marrying the right person, letting my emotions be my guide. So we are taught that we should just be logical about things, that it's dicey to let our emotions lead, that emotions make us illogical and irrational. But what I know now is that we make our most correct decisions by listening to our body wisdom and to our intuitive knowing and our gut response rather than a pros and cons list. This is a topic I'll talk about so much more in this podcast because learning how to make embodied decisions has been life-changing for me. But now, so here we are today. I have been working as a program coordinator at a local university for 5 years. As I mentioned, it's a job that has allowed me to work with students doing meaningful work. And I work with them just over the summer, and then I'm doing program planning the rest of the year. And this allows me to have energy left over. This will be my last summer at that job. I am leaving my job to follow my dream of working for myself. Adam and I don't have any kids. When we met, I started opening to the idea, and we started trying, but we were not successful. And I have to say, deep down, I worried about whether or not I could be a good mom. Let me tell you about how my HSP-ness shows up now. So now I am sensitive to sound. I will tell you, I am sensitive to sound. And I become my most sensitive to sound when I'm tired. Sleep is everything to me. I have got to get a decent night of sleep. And when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, I get hangry. And I don't know how I ever stayed up late at night partying. Now I come home from my nephew's soccer game at 10 p.m. and it feels like 3 a.m. And late night fatigue makes me touchy and jumpy. I am sensitive to sound. When I am in sensory overload, what happens is I start averting my eyes. I stop making eye contact with anyone around me, and I'm just trying so hard to shut out everything around me. So self-care is a huge part of what I do. I meditate. I eat to support my blood sugar. I do a lot of different things, and I'm going to share more about those here on this podcast. We'll talk a lot about self-care. One of my favorite things to do after I've been in a place of really deep listening, if I've been like on a on a call, I will, I'll find that I'm really fatigued after that. So one of the things that I do is I actually lay down for 15 minutes. So I shut off all the sound, I turn off all the lights, and I actually lay down. Think about how you would lay down in Savasana at the end of a yoga class and how deeply relaxing it is. Well, that's what it does when you put your feet up actually and lay down. I set my phone for 15 minutes, and in that 15 minutes, I can actually feel my brain start to lighten up, and I can feel my energy be restored. That is one of my favorite ways to restore myself when I'm worn out during the day. So one of the questions you may be wondering is whether or not I am an empath. And I do not think of myself as an empath in a traditional sense. So here's my opinion about what it means to be an empath. As an empath, you take on the physical and emotional states of people around you. So say you're near someone who's headachy or very sad, and as an empath, you would take on those feelings yourself. And you may not realize why you start to feel these feelings. You just start to develop a headache or feel sad. And so I have never felt a connection to the term empath. Now, that's not to say I'm not deeply tuned into the emotions of people around me. I listen deeply under the surface of what's being said. I hear them. I feel for them. I get emotionally exhausted from it. I feel emotionally weighed down by watching dramatic TV. I had to quit watching Grey's Anatomy 20 years ago because the drama of the ER dragged me down. But I don't take on and physically experience other people's emotions and physical symptoms the way people who consider themselves to be empaths do. Now, here's what I do take on. I take on the thoughts and ideas of people around me. So if I read a book with new information that I've never read before, or never heard before, I will think that it is 100% the gospel truth. I will give all authority to the person who is writing that book and suspend my own judgment. Here's how I discover this. There's a tool called human design, which I am totally immersing myself in. And it was this tool that helped me to identify this pattern about how I absorb other people's thoughts and ideas. So let me just tell you a little bit about the tool. So human design is a tool that was channeled by a man named Ra Uru Hu in 1987. And it is based on the Chinese I Ching, the Kabbalah, astrology, astronomy, the chakra system. It's based on your date of birth, birth location, birth time. And what it does is it creates a picture or a chart of your energy, your personality, and your energy design. So your energy design is based on this birth information and a point 88 days prior to your birth, which is the time when your soul enters your body. And so this tool has pinpointed me. If you think about the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, these are tools for self-understanding, right? And so as the Myers-Briggs, I see that I'm an INFP, and I get the exact same printout that every other INFP gets. It's not personalized. Well, human design is personalized. And I just have to say that my self-understanding has expanded so much from learning about this tool. And in this tool, I learned that there are multiple different ways to be an empath. So I'm going to do a podcast episode on this because I think it's so valuable for understanding yourself. And if you're going through a confusing time, it's just so illuminating about why you're here, how you're designed, and what you're meant to do in this life. I'm super into it, as you can hear. So we'll talk more about that in future episodes. As you can hear from hearing my story, I have had times in my life that were very confusing. I felt lost about who I was and what I wanted and where my life was headed. I wondered why everything felt so hard. I experienced the biggest loss of my life with the passing of my dad. I made one of the hardest decisions of my life by ending my marriage, and yet that confusion eventually turned into clarity, and the pain started to heal with some loving care. And on the other side of my ending, there was a new beginning and another opportunity to learn. I hope that you will continue this conversation with me and that we'll learn together. In this podcast, we'll talk about everything related to energy, the energy of emotions and how our emotions are here to guide our decisions and how to find inner harmony and mental peace to deeply rest and have more joy. We'll talk about finding your own unique path in work and relationships and life, one that honors you and gives you emotional energy and physical energy to do what matters to you most. We'll talk about giving yourself permission to release what's not working in your life to create space for something new and better to come into your life. And of course, we'll talk about self-care, energy, and sleep as HSPs, and I will share more about my favorite tool, human design. And here are 3 questions just to contemplate and journal. Number 1, when do you feel most yourself? What are you doing? Who are you with? Number 2, what lights you up the most in life? And number 3, if anything were possible, what would you do in this lifetime? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with those questions. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode, please share it with a friend and leave a positive comment and subscribe. This helps other HSPs find the show.